Power up. Welcome to Energypreneurs, where I bring to you the exciting new opportunities in solar power, battery, and electric cars. I'm your host, Sohel Hasni. I have been tracking and analyzing these technologies on LinkedIn and Twitter for more than 10 years. Now we meet on podcast. Energy efficiency is very important. And let me sort of highlight the difference between energy efficiency and energy conservation. I'm reading now, if I switch off this light, that's energy conservation. But if I use an LED as opposed to an incandescent light bulb, then it's energy efficiency. I'm getting the same light, but using a better technology. So we discussed today with Mark Lister, a long-term energy efficiency champion, discuss the importance of energy efficiency in tackling climate change, why energy service companies, ESCOs, are very important in implementing energy efficiencies, and how electric vehicle adoption could also follow the same model. Let's share the benefit of the savings by switching from an internal combustion car to an electric car. Then I get into a debate. Why energy efficiency is important at all? As solar power is zero marginal cost. If I have solar on my roof, electricity is free. Why do I need to save? If I'm sitting by the river, I can drink as much as I want. Why do I care if my cup has a hole in the bottom and leaking water? Very interesting topic. Please join in to find more. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. Good afternoon from Manila.
Yeah, and good afternoon from Melbourne. So how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Maybe you can start by introducing yourself. I know you're a energy efficiency champion. Better coming from you.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, going back for quite a while now, working out of Australia originally and working on issues to do with sustainability and energy policy, and then moving to, that was for government, and then working for the private sector as well with an ESCO, one of the homegrown ESCOs in Australia, looking at lighting and cooling products for buildings and really looking at the early wave of interest in green buildings back in the early 2000s. And from there, going ahead to be an advocate and lobbyist for energy efficiency in Australia through setting up the Australian Alliance to Save Energy, now the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity, and the early days of the Energy Efficiency Council supporting that sort of work. So yeah, you're right. I had my background was in energy efficiency to that point. Then I moved to Manila, where I think we first came across each other. So how when I was working at Asian Development Bank in the knowledge department there, which has changed names a couple of times, but looking at how to bring climate change to the whole portfolio of ADB, which was in 2011, 2012. Interesting that ADB has now gone on to become the Climate Bank of Asia Pacific. At that stage, it was still early days of thinking how to shift the portfolio in that direction. So that was interesting work. And then I went back to energy efficiency in Copenhagen, working for, it's called the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency, now part of the UN Copenhagen Climate Center, really kind of a group of researchers and scientists supporting UNET on the mission towards energy transition as well. So after all that, setting up Asia Clean Energy Partners with my partner, Peter DuPont, and based out of our office in Bangkok, and looking at speeding up actions across particularly Southeast Asia, but also South Asia, in a region that really needs, I think, help to move faster on clean energy and energy efficiency. So there's a brief bite. So how's a quick run through?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Because energy efficiency was very important. Now I have some question mark about future of energy efficiency as electricity is becoming rather cheap and almost free. But we'll come to that. But you mentioned ESCO. This is a very good thing that can be applied to electric vehicle and many others. It's a benefit sharing scheme. Can you maybe just explain for our listeners, because they hear ESCOs all the time, but what is an ESCO?
Sure, that's a great question. And it's one of those business models that has a lot of promise. And actually, when you look at it for the first time, you say, yeah, this obviously should work, but it's not so easy in practice. An ESCO, short for Energy Services Company, is really about companies that will take some level of financial risk based on the performance of their project. So in energy efficiency, that means an ESCO is not just a product sales company. It will actually go ahead to install and then potentially guarantee or verify the performance of that equipment. What that does is allows the savings to be better captured, better monetized, to be able to say, okay, if I'm installing energy efficiency equipment, the measurement of that is in reduced savings or reduced outgoings. But being able to capture that, monetize that, and say, actually, that will be what we can use to pay for the initial investment. The ESCO guaranteeing that, potentially being able to use that cash flow to service finance, for example, is a way of saying there's no upfront cost to the customer because the ESCO can actually take on that financial risk. So that makes a lot of sense. And it should be a model that really works, where you can say to an industrial energy user or a large energy consumer of any kind, really, at no cost to you, this company can come in, reduce your energy bills. We can share the savings for a period. You'll get some degree of savings. The ESCO will use the rest of the savings to repay its investment. And then you achieve the full savings after that, and the equipment's handed to you. So should be a win situation. There's a lot of difficulties in implementing that model. And we've seen that around the world. It's been successfully done in many places, and we can go into a bit of why that is, if you like. I don't want to go on for too long about that, but certainly ESCOs are one way of getting energy efficiency out there and overcoming that investment that's required by using cash flows to repay the upfront costs.
Let me understand this, which you are saying that if I'm buying a energy efficient thing at home, say a fridge or a television, any equipment, and someone saying this is really amazing, it's going to do magic, you said, no, I don't want to take that technical risk. I'll pay 50% or some percentage, and the rest I will pay as I see the savings. So we'll share the benefits of the savings. So that way the supplier also taking some risk if it doesn't work somehow.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's about. It's about a risk sharing agreement. It can go everywhere from saying, I won't pay anything up front for this equipment, and the supplier, you can pay for the equipment and then use my savings that I wouldn't take for myself, but I would share with you, that can be used to repay the cost. Or you can go to the other side and say, I will pay for everything, but I want to be sure that this thing works like you're telling me. So I want you to guarantee the performance of this equipment so that I can get the savings that I expect. So these different models of sharing savings or having guaranteed savings are all different ways of sharing risk on the project. And it's to bring trust in the equipment, because I think a lot of people are skeptical about energy efficiency. They say, what if this saving doesn't get achieved? No, I invested in this for nothing. Maybe I'm interested in this, but I don't want to take the risk. So this change in risk sharing through performance-based contracting is a really nice way to unlock more activity, unlock more capital, and overcome that sort of resistance that we see from a lack of confidence in some of the technologies.
That's what I thought. The world has this unique opportunity in sitting in front of us, which is electric vehicle, which to me is an energy efficient form of transport, because you don't produce heat. It's like an incandescent light bulb. 80% energy goes into heat and you need the light, right? Not 80, 95%. Same gasoline car, most of the energy goes into producing heat, which you don't use. If it's electricity, there's an energy efficiency argument. So I was thinking, maybe the right place for this electric vehicle is power companies become an ESCO, basically giving you a car and said, okay, you pay us from the savings you make. Of course, the detail will be in how do you calculate and how do you manage. Why is not that happening? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a good idea. And you talk about cars and electric vehicles. One of the things I studied a long time ago now, but when I was looking at some of these questions, even in my studies, I was writing about that. And one of the benefits of these sorts of cars, like you say, basically fossil fuel vehicles in the internal combustion engine, a lot of the energy goes to heat, and it also goes to move the car because it's quite heavy, right? This big engine and these big steel cars. So actually bringing lighter cars with lighter components means you don't need as much power to power them either. So you get this kind of cascading effect, sort of mass decompounding, as they call it. And then that was looked at by Amory Lovins way back in the day at the Rocky Mountain Institute. But the question of how you would finance this and get a bit more innovative about the way you could actually capture the benefits of these things, I think that's one of the problems that energy efficiency suffered from all the way along, because energy efficiency is not just about the equation that I told you about, the end user saying, I'll save something and therefore we can use that saving to pay for the cost. Energy efficiency also has savings on the network. Energy efficiency or energy consumption reduction means avoided investment in generation infrastructure. We don't have the same demand requirement on supply to keep growing. So reducing that demand, taking that pressure off, being able to be used for things like shaving peak demand, by using or powering down at various times. They're all super benefits for the overall grid, for the overall energy system, but we still somehow fail to capture them in energy efficiency. So with vehicles, for example, the great benefit that they can provide is as a backup battery for the grid as we increase penetration of renewables in peak times. This is something that we have to figure out how to pay electric vehicle users for, so that they can actually look at the equation of spending upfront on a vehicle, which may sometimes be more expensive than other vehicle choices. At least in Australia, it's like that at the moment. But that's because we haven't been able to adequately capture the benefits of these vehicles to the whole system. And so yes, a move to energy efficiency usually means a range of benefits, but how do we capture them and internalize that to the actual purchase cost or the purchase decision that would be made by an end user? I think that's actually a lot of what we need to work on in terms of structural resistance to some of these shifts. And if we do that, we'll be able to start to accelerate the pace of change, I think.
Yeah. You are talking about benefit as well beyond what I was talking about, because of course there's a huge societal benefit in shifting peak, reducing the demand from the grid, increasing the load factor and everything else. But I was saying very simple. To do 100-kilometer, a car like Nissan Leaf will take maybe kilowatt hour, which is 75 cents to $1.20, depending on how much you pay electricity. But 6 liters of fuel needs $7. So it's almost like a 75 cents by $7. So if a power company says, come on, hang on, the savings you make for every 100-kilometer of driving, $6, give it to me, and I'll give you a car, maybe it will work out.
That's a great idea. And I guess I took what you said and really ran with it to the whole energy system. But at that local level, it's the same kind of concept as the ESCO concept in buildings or in industry.
Absolutely.
We're saying, I will pay for those things because I know the savings will be achieved over time. The problem, to your question, why isn't this happening? And why doesn't this automatically happen everywhere? You need people like yourself, who understand the opportunity here. And most people are working in the paradigm that they've been brought up in. So that utilities aren't necessarily thinking in those kind of forward-thinking sort of models. They're thinking about how they continue to work under existing models. So this requires, for these things to happen, it requires a degree of confidence, a degree of appetite for change. It requires a number of skilled people in different parts along that chain, including from the car companies, including from the customer themselves, need to be savvy to understand what's going on. And there needs to be a legal basis of trust in contracts and enforceability to allow all that to happen, because I think people typically, the same with ESCO contracts in buildings or in our factories, people feel that it's risky or that they feel that there's maybe something could go wrong here. So those sorts of models do exist and they can work, but they often fall over, especially in developing countries where people have even less trust in their system to be able to actually, less trust in the other counterparties and less trust in the regulatory framework that's going to support their decision, and less trust in, if something goes wrong, enforcing the contract that they might have. So I think all of those things are basic things that actually stop these things from happening, otherwise that are otherwise beneficial, and we could hope to see more of towards a quicker transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you correctly said it's just people not thinking through. I was at a energy efficiency conference, I believe in 2006. Someone came and presented how wonderful CFLs were. I knew about CFL, but then I told him, why is not that happening? He said, no. I said, why? Because the benefits were, you pay for a light bulb $1, it lasts 10,000 hours. Benefits are huge. So then I took up a challenge. I said, maybe give it a shot because no one is doing it. Maybe that's the reason. So which ended up being the $50 million project I did for energy efficiency in the Philippines. But I had to go all the way to the president herself, because everybody said, why should Department of Energy be interested into light bulb? My argument was, one light bulb says 50 watt, 1 million light bulbs says 50 megawatt. To build a power station 50 megawatt takes $50 million plus 5 years. To change a light bulb takes bugger all nothing. And 1 million light bulb costs 1 million. When I went to the president, she was saying, is it that simple? She was asking everyone, nobody came in my way, but I said, yeah, I'm happy to explain. And that's how we did the project, because because it's so simple to do, why bother sort of thing.
Yeah. It's almost so simple that people look past it. And I've heard all sorts of things over the years where basically people look at this stuff and the idea of a virtual power plant, which is what you're talking about, saying, actually, this is not about generating more stuff and putting more electrons down wires. This is about costing less by using the system less. It's the same thing, but in reverse. But that putting it in reverse like that, it seems to not really connect well with a lot of people's thinking. So it is difficult to get that message across. And we see that reluctance in various ways. I've had situations where people have been presenting energy efficiency project that says we can do all these things. Actually, we'll make money and we'll reduce our emissions and things will basically be on a better footing. It's a classic win. And the management boards and committees deciding to not proceed with these projects because it just looked too good to be true, and so that it must be a catch somewhere. So just like a failure to accept that this could be just a smart move and that it would make a lot of sense. So those kinds of things. I've even had this sort of more sort of economic rationalist argument saying, actually, the optimal amount of energy efficiency is already being delivered, because if there was more opportunities out there, then clearly the market would step up and take them because it's obvious that there's opportunity. It's not, but that's actually a fallacy, because we know that there's so many of these blockages, which are at the behavioral and psychological level than they are at the technical level, which is what makes it fascinating, in my opinion. How do we break through on something which is so obviously and so it should really be taken as an obvious good idea, but still it doesn't happen? Why is that? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, simple things are hard to do. And simple market failures no one sees. It's a complex market failure people see at the system level. But if you said on a simple market failure, it's a market failure, right? Nobody wants to do it because it's so tiny. Who cares?
Yeah, and there's a lot of things I think that play against it. Doesn't make them a bad idea. These are just things we have to solve. But typically the opportunity is in very small parcels and very disaggregated. Like you mentioned, 1 million individual light bulbs. Much harder to find the 1 million individual sockets than it is to build one large power plant. Yes. And it's also invisible. So with our power plant, we can put on a hard hat and cut a ribbon and say, look what we did. These light bulbs will be broadly invisible. So difficult to sell the concept externally. And I think in countries and situations where you've got years of history of energy scarcity, where people are used to saying, actually, I wish I could have more access to electricity. And it's the living situation is that they've had a lack of supply, or there's been brownouts, blackouts. That's the norm. Then it's difficult to convince someone when they have access to energy, no, now you shouldn't use it. You shouldn't have unlimited access, because people are saying, I would wish for more. I would wish for more electricity, more energy if I could. So it's a difficult message to sell. It runs counter to their mentality around what they would need to create a better life. And that's a really tough sell, actually, as well.
Yeah, I think also difficulty come in anytime you try to solve a problem, everyone else dumps their other problems, because especially energy efficiency suffers from this. I remember doing a project in China many years ago, 2002, about compact fluorescent light bulbs. And then when they were saying, oh, we have to change the minimum tariff and others, they said, just give them free light bulbs, because consumer cares how much they are getting out the pocket. If you give them light bulb, at least their consumption will be half. But they said, but we promised them we'll give them a discount on tariff. I said, but it's the same impact. It's very difficult to get through those arguments. And then similarly, I remember in Indonesia, in one project, they were saying these people don't pay this particular community for some reason. Their default is very high. At least give them free light bulbs. At least if they're stealing or whatever non-technical loss, at least it would be efficient. I was saying that people are stealing water and they are using a mug with a lot of holes. I want to give them new mugs. They're stealing, that's a different problem. But at least do it efficiently so that I don't lose more, right? Anyway, we digressed quite a bit, but I'm just thinking, you mentioned earlier energy efficiency and climate change. Energy efficiency is one of the very large pillars. Do you want to talk a little bit about it? How important is energy efficiency in the context of us trying to help or address climate change?
Sure. Yes. Back to the point of, is all the cost-effective energy efficiency out there already being done? No, it isn't. We know that very clearly. And all the reasons that we're just talking about mean that when it comes to the crunch, people who are thinking about this and maybe understand and want to do something on energy efficiency will say, yeah, I'll only do stuff that pays for itself in say 2 years or 3 years. They don't want to take a longer term risk But thinking in the opposite way, something that pays for itself in 2 years has a 50% rate of return. That's more than profitable, but that's the kind of hurdle that people are setting. So there's a lot more potential that can be addressed cost effectively. And the estimates on this from a few years ago, at least, that the IEA put out in terms of pathways and technologies that are needed. Typically, energy efficiency comes up as providing something between 40 and 50% of the solution in terms of the total greenhouse gas reductions that we need to achieve. So the kind of 50 billion approximately greenhouse gas emissions CO2 equivalent that we have now, reducing to zero, 40 to 50% of that coming from the demand side. So think of that in terms of where you hear the debate about where the solutions are. It's about solar and wind, and then it's about a whole raft of other technologies, CCUS, nuclear, whatever. These things always pop up in the debate. But the simple act of using less energy, particularly in industry, I think, and also in our transport sector, and to a lesser extent in residential buildings. And the split is generally sort of 40, 20 almost, depending on which country, but industry being the highest, then transport more like 30, and then buildings 25%, something like that. So effort in those areas to reduce emissions is potentially nearly half the solution. And the thing about it as well that I think people need to, well, as an advocate for this, I think we want people to realize is that it's the quickest solution out there. We can do this straight away with really well-known technologies. It's the most widespread opportunity that there is. It's in every region of every country around the world. It's down to the local level, so it can be very engaging. And yeah, it's like I said, existing technologies that are fairly quick to deploy compared to some of the other solutions where it's going to take years to build new capacity and it's actually per unit saved a more expensive option. So we're talking about something that's potentially a real multiplier to all the other solutions that we should be getting on with immediately as a kind of a supercharger to all the other things you're doing. In a sense, it buys time for all those other generation figures to get further ahead. And we're a long way off at the moment when you look at things like replacing heat requirements in industry with renewable or non-zero emission sources. Only about 3% of heat being provided by non-fossil fuel sources at the moment. We need to do much better than that. And bringing the heat requirement down through efficiency is a key action to increase that 3% more quickly. There's obviously some sectors that are hard to shift in that regard, but we're doing quite well on electricity. We're doing less well on fuels and on heat. Transport fuel is only about 9% or something at the moment, which is moving to clean sources, which we expect to see that increase with EVs. But again, if we can reduce the requirement, those percentages will move up more quickly.
Yeah, I think other biggest factor is, of course, people are not aware. I'll give you one simple example. The other day, I was telling someone that, do you know what's the wattage of your television? People know the size of their television because now the TV sizes are growing. Then I looked up in the Philippines on a Facebook marketplace. Are there CRT television being sold? Yes, 350 watt CRT television, someone's selling for, and this thing gets imported secondhand. Tons of them, if you go to some part of Manila, they have on their shelves. And most of the poorer people who can't afford buy these things. Whereas for $50, maybe $70, you can buy no name brand, very cheap, very high quality Chinese LEDs, which may be 45 watt, 35 watt. But they don't buy that's brand new, and that's Chinese, we don't know. They will rather buy a 15-year-old CRT Sony TV, which is basically energy sucker, maybe 5-6 times. And within maybe 2 months, the payback period is there because people run TV all the time. And the same thing happens with fan. Again, if you spend $100 a fan, you get 40-watt fans. But if you spend $20, you get a fan which is 85 watt. How do we communicate this thing to average person on the street? I get so frustrated. Do you have any answer to that?
You're pointing to one of the big challenges, which is to get people to think long-term, think about the future, right? Think about the whole life cycle, because typically people will think in the short term. They think about here and now. They think about what is this going to cost me right now? Even though in the long term, you can show them the figures that says it will be worse. You'll be worse off by buying this thing. They will still prioritize the cheaper upfront cost. And I think for a while there, I was really interested in studying some of these things because it's actually totally irrational. It's difficult to combat this thinking because it doesn't follow logic, but it's actually what you could call a predictable irrationality. And it can be observed.
It's also a market failure in a way, not bringing the signals through decision making.
Yeah, it is. But I guess my point is saying that this is human nature. It's like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? If the cost is less now, then I'll take that, even though it's irrational.
But the time frame here is like,
Yeah.
I was talking to a very senior lawyer here. He says, I don't like this society. Everything gets thrown out. People use so short term. And I said, true, but for energy efficiency, air conditioners, motors, people should upgrade if possible, because that's what energy efficiency is. Conservation is that, okay, I switch the light off, but getting the same light with the better technology. He said, no, I don't believe it. I have a aircon that I bought in 1975 still running. I said, you not only causing so much money to yourself, which is very rich, but I say societal issues. You could have maybe with the same electricity, you can connect up the whole neighborhood. He said, no, my electricity bill is, I don't know. That's what he said. I actually don't know. But how do you address these people?
Yeah, I think you're right to some extent to say that it's a policy opportunity for forward-thinking policymakers, because what we know is that people don't necessarily take all the facts and make a good decision in these situations.
And he's one of the top lawyer in the country.
People do not think in the long term about these decisions. But if it's true that there is societal benefits from doing this, then we can capture those benefits and basically say your decision has bigger benefits. It has benefits for you, but it has benefits for society as well. We can take some of that value and then put it back to the consumer to say, actually buying this thing here advantages society as well as advantaging you. We can provide some push, some incentive, some impetus for them to change their purchase behavior, right? Because otherwise, I think my earlier point is to say people are irrational about this, but we can plan for that. We can predict that. We don't have to sit there and go, be surprised that they didn't make a better decision, because we've seen it happen for too long now that we know people are wired in that way. So we can set policy around that and maybe do a better job of capturing the benefits and passing them on to the consumer as a way of changing their decision.
Yeah, I think it's just a communicating. I hope some of our listeners will go and check at home what their fans' wattage and television wattage is. That would be one big achievement.
And do the sums to actually figure it out and say, wait a minute, this is what I have. This is the alternatives. I think people also have a reaction to saying, like the example you mentioned, they don't want to retire something which is still working, right? So my air conditioner, it's 50 years old, and so it's good that it's still going. And so why would I get rid of something perfectly useful and working? There is a reason. And the reason is that actually this is costing you day by day to keep in service.
Yeah, I use this example, and I'm hoping in the next couple of months, I'll get a call saying, by the way, I changed my air conditioner. I was telling him, how many hours you use the air conditioner? He said, oh, it's so expensive. We just use at night. I said, if you change your air conditioner, 50 years old, you can run 24/7 and you still better, your electricity bill may be cheaper. And I was about to offer that, saying, can I take this escrow? I'll buy you an aircon. I'm so... And we share the benefits.
The benefits are clearly there. We know they are. And it's really just somehow getting this. I actually think that the message is slowly getting there, because the urgency to do something in this area is growing. And so governments in particular who need to, we've basically seen governments lead this through policy in many cases where it's been more successful. And so governments are getting the message and saying, if we are going to meet our targets for either the Paris Agreement targets or our sort of net zero by 2050 targets nationally, then we have to get more serious about action now, moving more quickly. And so they're turning to energy efficiency again and thinking about what can be done. I'm working at the moment with Cambodia through the CAP-RED program, which is the Cambodia Australia program for resilient economic development. And they've really taken this on and actually looking at the ESCO model and saying, how do they get industry working on energy efficiency? Because right now it's not happening for all the reasons that we've been talking about. And so how could they push things along? So trying to get some interested energy users saying, yeah, we actually want to do energy efficiency projects, getting some local suppliers and companies, technology companies, to go ahead and do some work, do some audits, figure out where the opportunities are, and structure a program that could get funding as a demonstration. So they're moving on that now, which is really encouraging to see that there's interest in such a thing. Similarly in Laos, some real moves there. Similarly in Indonesia, we're seeing some real push towards energy efficiency in the Philippines, actually, a couple of years ago with the legislation set up a fantastic framework for doing more energy efficiency. So now we actually need the end users, in my opinion, we need the end users to come to the party a bit more and overcome some of this initial resistance and break through that to say, actually, my initial reaction is, I'm not sure about this, or, oh no, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, to actually say, no, wait a minute, I'm looking at this carefully now. I can take action, and I want people to come and help me and provide me the services that allow me to make these decisions. So I can see an upswing in activity, but like I said, I think it's really on the side of the end user engagement where we need to really push now.
Okay. What are the big global energy efficiency initiatives going on right now? Because as you mentioned that it's a big portion of net zero commitments, right? The initiatives people can check out on and learn from.
Okay, yeah, there's too many to count, I would say. We've seen a lot of energy efficiency uptake and a lot is happening around the world because it does make sense. If you take a minute to actually break through that initial barrier and get to the point where you consider projects on their merits, they make sense. And so people are doing that in many cases organically, finding their way to it. Like I said, if we're talking about sort of Asia and Southeast Asia, the Philippines is doing some terrific things in energy efficiency, pushing for mandatory reporting or engagement by large energy users with requirements on them to submit what plans they will make to then take action. That needs to be backed up by an industry that can deliver, of course, and it also suffers, I think, because the ministry doesn't have the resources to be able to enforce all of the rules that they've put in place. And so things are moving more slowly than they could be. But the framework is there. I think some great policy initiatives like that. India's always been doing a lot in energy efficiency. Bangladesh as well, through IDCOL, the government agency, they're pushing for finance in this area. Europe's been working on energy efficiency for 30 years, looking at the sorts of things that Denmark put in place a long time ago, and Germany as well, to create those energy efficient conditions. The Inflation Reduction Act in the US came in and brought in a huge number of enabling frameworks and funding for energy efficiency upgrades. And a lot of it started from public buildings and municipal buildings, that kind of thing, as a way of leading the market. So there's many initiatives. The Chinese initiative on industrial energy efficiency that's going back a few years now is a good example, run by ICF. In fact, most countries have done something, but nowhere near the potential that they could reach if they came back to re-examine it. And that's what we're trying to push for. And I'm involved with something that I set up in my work in Copenhagen, as I mentioned, called the Global ESCO Network, to try and push for an energy efficiency industry where you've got literate suppliers who can start talking about and thinking about this question of how do we bring finance to the table? Because we can't finance it from government alone. This is a huge opportunity. Renewables are invested typically by private funds, and we need energy efficiency investments to come from private funds as well. It went through all government grants and development finance. So how do we unlock these private sector players? And part of that is about supporting the ESCO network, or through the ESCO network, be able to support countries to build up that sector and understand the model. Things like performance measurement and verification, which is critical. So we can say how much savings are being achieved and do we have a kind of objective basis for measuring these things. I'm the chair of something called the Efficiency Evaluation Organization, or EVO, which has the global protocol for this. So the International Measurement and Verification Protocol. So IPMVP, as it's called, by short, not very kind of catchy, but that's what it is. And this is the gold standard for how we measure these sorts of things. Those kind of fundamental building blocks of getting the industry moving. As I said, there's a lot happening all around the world, but there's a lot further to go in terms of potential.
So what else Mark Lister does for fun? Too much energy efficiency. What else you do?
Are you saying energy efficiency is not fun?
Yeah, other than that, I said you're having too much fun with energy efficiency. What else?
Other than work, I'm actually tired at the moment from playing football because I've been playing, I'm too old for it, but I've been playing football on the weekends. I always played all the way through, and it's a nice connector as we travel around the world to do things, because most places do play. But I'm feeling tired at the moment, actually, from all that running around. I'm too old for it, but still doing it. But I enjoy doing that. And now around home, I have 3 older children, so look after them and shepherd them through life here in Australia. And we also manage to get out of the city now and again my wife has a farm outside of the town where her family does. So we get down there as well and try and reconnect with some of the country issues that we face as well. Yeah, never a dull moment. And between all that, travel around Southeast Asia to connect with people doing things in the projects that we're involved with.
Now, let me go back to my controversial topic because I spent quite a bit of time on energy efficiency as well. I started in 88, I think, State Electricity Commission of Victoria. Victorian government at the time gave us 50 million to play with. We did a lot of energy efficiency. CFL was $38 those days. So it's a very different world. And then I worked on energy efficiency in many countries, Southeast, South Asia, through my ADB work. But having done all of those, right now, if you look at the energy efficiency, what we are trying to do, we're trying to save a kilowatt hour because it saves us money. Now, the world that we are in or slowly getting into is a zero marginal cost electricity world. That means there is no value for that kilowatt hour. Like I have a solar panel here in my apartment in Manila that produces few kilowatt hour, but I have fans running. Why do I switch them off? Because it's just getting electricity for free, running it. Yes, maybe there is a bit of battery degradation over the years, but very tiny. So there's no point switching that off, except psychologically, we switch it off as we go. Australia has almost 33 gigawatt hours rooftop solar behind the meter. My house in Melbourne producing electricity that's getting wasted because sometimes there's nobody there, no one is using it. Why should we save? As we have access to electricity, do you think that fundamental need for savings maybe will diminish residential, especially wherever the electricity is generated with zero marginal cost situation, solar, wind being the example?
It's a good point, and it's not lost on people who are advocating for energy efficiency that the argument about emission reduction only holds if you're indeed got a sort of high emissions intensity supply. Because if everything's being supplied by wind and solar and other sources, then you're not reducing any emissions by saving energy or turning things off. So I think that's a fair point where there's supply, but I think it's also about this where it comes back to policy and having the rules in place to actually allow the generation that exists to be correctly harnessed. Like you mentioned Australia, one of the things that Australia is leading in the energy sense is in rooftop solar, right? So we have something like a third or more of houses now with rooftop solar because it makes sense from a sort of individual user point of view behind the meter. But we're now bumping up against the very real kind of constraint of not being able to accept peak solar into the grid at sunny times, right? And I was reading just the other day about Western Australia.
Western Australia is penalizing.
Yeah, the largest sort of standalone grid in the world, I think, that doesn't have really trading or interconnection with any other system. And so it's very unpopular indeed. They have what they call curtailment, and they're basically just getting shut off. How do we deal with that? The answer is in more capability to deal with intermittency, which is either through utility scale batteries or potentially the holy grail being everyone having EVs and the storage being under carbonates rather than in some kind of far off location as a sort of a huge standalone battery. So getting that interactivity and getting the incentives right so that people can actually say, oh yeah, now's the moment when I can charge up my vehicle and now's the moment where I can discharge my vehicle to the grid in support of the system as it needs it and have the incentives right that people make the right decisions. So I guess that's what we're all working to. That's, I guess, one thing, the bigger question about how we get to a greater penetration of renewables. But your question in all that is about energy efficiency. Why should I bother? It's still the same benefits. It's not the same equation, for example, on your electricity bill, right? If you're already generating all your needs and you can even export it and you're making everything you have, then it's fine. You would, if you were getting the incentives for exporting, then you would be getting less without energy efficiency. But you're also providing all of the other benefits of reducing pressure on the system. So if you're talking about the need to acquire new system capacity, energy efficiency still makes total sense from that perspective. It might not be at the local end user level where those benefits are accruing. And that's where you need policy to reset incentives to say, actually, your effort in energy efficiency, maybe it's not saving emissions, but it is saving pressure on the grid. And that can be value that you're creating that can be sent back to you to change your decisions. So demand response and demand side management programs for industry are in quite widespread use, where large energy users are saying, actually, you know what, we'll pay you to shut things down for a little while because it's more valuable to us that we do that than it is to your business to keep running. Basically creating a situation where incentives can be used to make sure end users do make decisions which benefit the system. And so energy efficiency decisions can still absolutely play into that, even though it doesn't have the emissions payoff or the things. It's not always that way in terms of policy settings.
That's today, because the fundamental of the wholesale electricity market is you have to match demand supply at the same time. Battery
Yes,
changes
right.
that equation. So there is no concept of peak demand if you have a flat load curve. Everything is a base load. And that's happening slowly, right? Because I give you just one example, coming back to the point I was making. I have a 11 kilowatt on rooftop in Melbourne. I get about 40 kilowatt hour a day. I have a 13.5 kilowatt hour battery, and my daily consumption is 16 kilowatt hour. If I'm not in the house for a few days, battery is full, electricity is coming through the houses literally through the year. Why do I care? But again, this is Australia. This is different. But as solar becomes more efficient, as we have more and more rooftop solar, we'll all reach into that area eventually. One can hope.
Yeah, the right incentives would actually be paying you for the generation that you're providing. But right now, it's
If you have 33 gigawatt of solar, back
that's
of
right.
the Australian national electricity market demand is 33 gigawatt. It's not going to grow except penetration, right?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, unless we can find a way to absorb that additional generation, because that's what everyone's concerned about in this market, saying, well, how do we retire the old coal-fired power without creating this kind of glitch? Because we don't have the storage online to deal with the intermittency
Not now.
systems. I think we're getting there. I think I said to you the other day, it was a lot of noise and not much signal, like in terms of the message getting through. And so it's not all straight and clear cut. It's easy for us to agree this, but it's difficult to have everybody who's involved in the market agreeing that these are the outcomes, because people are pushing in different directions for different outcomes. So that makes things slower, but all the more reason for the sort of clarity of message about what we're trying to do to try and improve that, because it can be confusing from a policymaker's point of view as well.
Yeah, the goalpost is changing so fast. Like people argue why you will have 10 gigawatt hour batteries so expensive. I said, yes, but each car has 60 kilowatt hour battery. 1 million car is 60 gigawatt hour. You already close to that very soon.
Yeah.
We just need to find ways to tap into that resource. So it's a very complex situation we are in right now. It's very fun.
It's interesting. And I think people are grappling with this question all around the world in terms of how to move this forward in terms of system capability together. Like having too many solar panels all at once without the storage, it can't work that way. And similarly, we can't necessarily support 100% shift to electric vehicles unless we have the generation in place to deal with the uptick in electricity demand. So we're doing that at the moment, working with MEA in Thailand through the USAID Smart Power Program for Southeast Asia, and helping the Metropolitan Energy Authority in Thailand forecast what the impact of EVs might be so they can start to plan for the future. Everyone has to adjust to this new reality of maybe what we hope to achieve at the end in terms of where the energy sector will end up. But yeah, it has to all move at the same time, which makes things difficult.
Absolutely. So it's a very fun time. I think that's what you're saying. You have too much fun with energy efficiency.
There's plenty to do, that's for sure. And they're good arguments that we're making. I think we just need to find the right audiences who are ready to progress them.
Is there anything else I could have asked you or you want to share?
I was going to say, mention just if anyone is interested in this, that I mentioned a couple of times on the way through the need to really engage with end users to push through these initial areas of resistance and get people taking action, whereas before they might say, oh yeah, I know this is important, but I'm not really sure what to do. So we're actually, as a company, trying to convene a meeting and an overall platform for learning about these issues and aimed at corporates, probably the sort of small to medium-sized corporates or even quite large companies who aren't taking action on some of these things, but could be the sorts of companies that could actually formulate more energy efficiency projects for their own operations, or think about investing in cleaner generation, or even thinking about how they would go about creating power purchase agreements with other companies so that they're buying lower emissions power, or even offsetting using sort of nature-based carbon offsets and so on to get to net zero. So this idea about corporate decarbonisation, and we think that there's a huge untapped market there for people to actually get engaged, get informed, and start to take more action. So grow the conversation and in a sense, grow the industry, grow the level of activity here. Obviously, that works towards people like us, but I think that's what we need overall. We're just not seeing the level of acceleration, the level of the speed and scale of change that's required alongside the targets. The things are happening, but not happening anywhere near fast enough or large enough. So we're trying to create a platform ongoing. We're calling it CDX, or the Corporate Decarbonisation Exchange, where people can come and learn about this, learn about topics, learn about the decarbonisation university, if you like, where people can come along, do different modules, hear from experts, understand who are the enablers that can help them along the way, hear from their peers, case studies of people who've already done it, and basically grow this conversation. So that's something that we're doing. We've got an initial meeting in Bangkok to launch the platform on the 1st and 2nd of October coming up. And yeah, no, really interesting, I think, area to think about how we can push forward and, as I say, really try and get more engaged end users towards more projects, towards more activity, and more investment into the sectors that we're talking about, and ultimately, hopefully, quicker reduction in emissions. So I just wanted to mention that event coming up. I think it might be of interest to some of your listeners.
Yeah, no, absolutely. How can one reach you? What's the best way?
Okay, so there's a website for the platform, which will increasingly be populated with some of these learning resources. Right now, we're focused on the launch of this in October, and the website is SECOM, so it's Southeast Asia Corporate Decarbonisation Exchange. And if people look for that, even on LinkedIn, we've been quite active in starting to put the word out there. So yeah, if anyone was interested to come along or get involved, that's how you would find us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. As you can tell, I'm passionate about these issues, so I'm happy to talk to you about it. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.